Mr. Kinsman.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Nixon, what would you do as president to bring law and order back to America, and what is your definition of law and order?
Well, let me start with the definition first. By law and order, I mean law and order for everybody. And let me lay one thing right on the line at the beginning. I know that it has been suggested that law and order is a code word for racism. I don't buy that at all. Let's understand that as far as law and order is concerned, that black Americans have just as great a stake in law and order as white Americans have. Fear stalks the ghettos as well as it stalks the suburbs. And we have to remember that when we think of organized crime, for example, it preys on the poor. The poor people, for example, they are the victims of the narcotics, and they're the victims of the numbers and all the other things which organized crime engages in. So when we see crime going up 9 times as fast as population as it has in these last 8 years, and that's 3 times as fast as it went up during the Eisenhower years, when we see, and this is the critical point, that if we don't have a change, a new policy by a new Attorney General, and a new attitude toward the enforcement of law and order, new laws and new strengthening of the peace forces in this country, do you realize that if the same trend continues, that crime in the United States will double in the next 4 years by the end of the next term of the next president? Now, I think we can stop the rise of crime. And what we have to recognize first is that law and order is something that everybody wants. But if you're going to have law and order, it must be just. It must apply justly to everybody. As I said in my acceptance speech at Miami, we've got to have respect for law. But if they're to be respected, they must deserve respect. And we go third to the point that if you're going to have law and order, you must also have, among people who do not have a chance, you've got to have the hope that they can go up. It's very easy to say, well, if we just put enough police in the cities to control some of these things, and if we pay them enough and we give them enough authority, we'll have law and order. Not over the long haul. Because if you have people that have no hope, they eventually will explode. And if they explode, then you simply have what I would call the warfare, which nobody in America wants. Now, you don't need to have that. That's why the question asked just a little earlier by Mr. Kinnett is directly related to that. The reason that we've got to move on these problems of poverty, these problems of unemployment, these problems of hopelessness that will exist in America, is that only as we move on those problems do we pull some of the fire away from those who would destroy America, those who would burn. I think what we have to remember is then that they all go together. Now, having spoken of the problem, let me tell you some of the things that needs to be done. First, we've got to look at some of the decisions that have been handed down by some of our courts. Let me make my position very clear. I'm a lawyer. I've argued a case before the Supreme Court on 2 occasions. I respect the Supreme Court as an institution. I respect the men on it. On the other hand, I disagree with some of the decisions. And as I look over the decisions of that court in recent years, I have reached the conclusion, that and other courts, that some of our courts in their decisions, and it's only the decisions I'm criticizing, but some of our courts in their decisions have gone too far in weakening the peace forces as against the criminal forces. And we have to ready that balance in the United States. Now, let me give you an example. Let me give you an example. I was just in Philadelphia the other day. I think we've got to use examples to prove these points. I was in Philadelphia the other day. I found that as a result of one Supreme Court decision that I have criticized, and a decision that will be rectified provided the law of the Congress does get the constitutional approval that it will need. But looking at that particular decision, I found as a result of that one decision, these 3 things happened. A cab driver had been brutally murdered. The man who confessed it was set free because of that decision. An elderly man had been brutally murdered and robbed. And the man who confessed it while he was on a spending spree in Las Vegas, he was set free. And then an elderly woman was brutally murdered, and she was robbed and clubbed to death. And the man who was guilty of that crime was set free. Now, I think that when you have a situation where your courts, because of technical factors involved, have gone that far, what we need to recognize is that the balance between the peace forces and the criminal forces has gone too far in this way. We've got to put it back this way, because we've got to remember that the innocent in America deserve protection as well as those who are charged with crime. I would also, if I can, and then going further than that, it's a question too of new policies. I would set up a national council on law enforcement in which we bring together at the federal government level the top cabinet officers and others who can adopt the programs across the board, stopping, for example, the flow of narcotics into this country, because narcotics, as you know, is one of the major feeders of crime in our big cities. A national council for law enforcement. I would have, in addition to that, a national body which would have as its purpose to be a clearinghouse for all kinds of activities across this country, so that we could find ways to inform people across the country, local communities, as to how we could improve our law and order facilities. And finally, I think it's vitally important that leadership at the very top, from the President on down and the Attorney General on down, make very clear that this is a nation which has gotten where it has by recognizing that there is a way to change those things we don't like through peaceful means. And in my view, in a system which does provide a method to change what you don't like peacefully, there is no cause that justifies breaking the law or engaging in violence. That's what I think has to be laid down from the very top.